The autumn wind is a pirate, blustering in from sea. With a rollicking song, he sweeps along, swaggering boisterously. His face is weather-beaten. He wears a hooded sash, with a silver hat about his head, and a bristling black mustache. He growls as he storms the country, a villain big and bold. And the trees all shake and quiver and quake as he robs them of their gold. The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won.
What's up, Raider Nation? Silver and Black Attack coming at you again with another video. And now we're back on a roll. We're back putting out content daily. And here's another video for y'all. We got the 53-man roster prediction, which is coming out shortly here on Tuesday with the 53-man, cut down. 24 cuts being made to the Raiders' current roster. And we're going to go through every position by position. Jahan and I will alternate, and we'll go through guys who we think are on the bubble and guys who we think are, locks to make this team this year. So, yeah, starting it off right here, 3 quarterbacks. I mean, that's just how the NFL is now. You got 2, and then you got your emergency third, who's active at all times. Minshew's the starter. O'Connell's the backup. We already know that, which we have talked about it before. O'Connell might get a few starts if Gardner Minshew struggles. But the surprise here is Nathan Peterman. Obviously beat out the other 2 guys. Carter Bradley, again, a undrafted free agent, not very good. Didn't play very well. And Anthony Brown, of course, got cut. He didn't even make it to the end of preseason. So Peterman, the veteran, he's here, the lock as the 3rd string quarterback. Yeah, and go ahead, Johan. Next up, running backs.
All right, so on to running backs. We had 4 running backs making the roster, and so obviously with Zamir White, with the departure of Josh Jacobs, he's going to be stepping into that lead running back role. So Zeus White at the number 1 spot. That we also got Alexander Madison making it. We gave him a contract this offseason. He's not in any trouble missing the roster, so he's going to be there as well. Amir Abdullah, we're going to have making it again. He's been a consistent receiving back for us, so he's not a bad player. He's going to be there as depth. And then Dylan Lobby, he was a draft pick for us. He's shown a little bit during preseason. He had some fumbling issues, but he's another guy we can develop and hopefully turn into the next Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, I mean, we heard great things about him. And, one thing else to note about Abdullah is he's a special teams guy as well. He's one of those guys who runs down the field. And then on the punts, he also, I believe he was returning punts for a while. Yeah, Amir Abdullah, another guy for special teams who, makes an impact on there as one of those bomber guys. But yeah, moving on to wide receiver. So it's obvious that Devontae and Jacoby are locked at the 1 and 2. Then after that, Trey Tucker, showed extreme, durability and speed during the preseason. So if you look at the number 3 guy, Trey Tucker had an insane campaign during the first 2 games of the preseason. Caught the deep threats down the field, had those, Gardner Minshew got him the ball down the field. And he was there as that 3rd guy, that Henry Ruggs type number 11, who's just going to stretch the field vertically. And that's what the Raiders love. So after that, we have DJ Turner making the roster because DJ Turner, again, is one of those guys who didn't play in the last preseason game, which kind of showed to us that, okay, after the second game, he was already a lock to make the roster. Is another good guy, number 19. He's very, he got hands. He's got hands and he can, run side to side, lateral receiver, can make possessional catches. So I think, that's another good guy to have as the 4th slot receiver. Then at number 5, we have Tyreek McAllister, who balled out in the last game of preseason, had the punt return for touchdown, had another receiving touchdown down the field. And overall, this guy just makes plays. He's a flashy player. He's someone I think we can develop, and I think he's someone who deserves to make the roster. And then at the number 6 receiver spot, we have Jalen Guyton, the former Los Angeles Charger, who, has been a speed guy in his career, but definitely provides that deep threat that we need, especially if something, God forbid, happens to Trey Tucker, which you never know in this league, what could happen. So having Jalen Guyton there is another special teams guy, but then who can fill in for, Trey Tucker and DJ Turner is another big, threat to have on offense.
Yeah, definitely no shortage of speed at that wide receiver spot. I think Telesco did a good job of infusing some talent and youth into that receiver room. But moving on to tight ends, it's customary to take three tight ends in the NFL. And so obviously our 13th overall pick, Brock Bowers, is our tight end one. He can do it all. We saw him line up at fullback, in the slot, out wide, and also he can play in line as a traditional tight end. So he's your Swiss Army knife type player at tight end. Michael Mayer, another guy that we're both really high on. He showed a little bit last year. He wasn't on the field as consistently as you would have hoped in his rookie year, but I think he's going to take that next step in his sophomore season. And he can do everything in terms of blocking. I would say he's a better blocking tight end than Bowers, and he's also a really good receiving threat over the middle as well. And then Harrison Bryant coming over from the Cleveland Browns, another guy. He played in the preseason, I believe the first two games. Didn't play that third preseason game, which again it signifies he's a locked in spot for our 53-man roster. So I like our tight end room. I think it's one of the best in the NFL for this next season.
Definitely. So moving on to the offensive line. Left tackle solidified Colton Miller, got healthy this year, had a few injuries last year that had him miss a few games, but he's back and healthy and coming off, I think he had a pec surgery this offseason. Left tackle solidified. Left guard, as we've heard over the past couple of weeks, Cody Whitehair from the Chicago Bears is going to be that left guard as they've moved Dylan Parham over to right guard. So Andre James is the center. We just re-signed him. We gave him some money. He's going to be the center. Right tackle, or right guard, sorry. They just moved Dylan Parham over to right guard. The right tackle spot is interesting. Okay, because we had Glaze, Munford, and Pete all making the roster here. So if Pete makes a roster as well as Glaze and Munford, it's going to come down to, I think, Delmar Glaze, we're going to say, is going to get the start at right tackle. But I think there, Munford will be that backup guy, and just for 53-man purposes, we had Andrus Pete also making the roster as depth, in addition to obviously Jackson Powers Johnson, who's eventually going to, take over that left guard spot for Cody Whitehair, hopefully as the season progresses. Then the last guy we have in the old line room is our backup center, Jordan Meredith, just in case, again, something happens to Andre James. You never know in the NFL. But it's not that easy to move over one of those, guards or tackles to the center spot. You really need a guy who's coordinated to play the center position. So keeping Jordan Meredith on the roster is a big option.
Yeah, definitely a lot of depth on that offensive line, which we really need. And so moving on to the D line, the defensive trenches. So our base for defensive linemen is going to be Max Crosby at that defensive end spot. Christian Wilkins, we brought in from Miami, who's our superstar defensive tackle. And then John Jenkins, who he's not a pass rush specialist. He's more of that run stuffer in the middle. So he's not bad. He's up there in age, but he'll be our starting nose tackle. And then Malcolm Kuntz, who showed a little bit last year with 8 sacks. We're all expecting him to make that next jump into a superstar edge rusher. So those are four base defensive linemen. And then for depth on the inside, Adam Butler, who we're both really high on from the Patriots. He's good at pass rushing. He's not as good of a run stuffer as Jenkins, but on those third down plays, he's going to get in there, get some burn in those rush situations. Tyree Wilson, who, he's struggled this preseason, but I think for the purpose of the 53-man roster, we're going to keep him around as depth to give him another season to learn behind guys like Crosby and Kuntz. And then more depth, Matthew Butler, who had a sack against the Niners. He was a fifth-round pick a few years back under the McDaniels regime. And so he's been developing slowly. I think give him another year. He's going to be sitting behind some of the guys we got in front of him. And then Janarius Robinson, who he showed a little bit last year. He had a few sacks in some big spots. He had some off the field troubles, but I think Antonio Pierce wants to keep him around. He's been playing a lot this preseason, and he's been flashing on tape, so he's going to get another spot and another shot to contribute for us. And then Byron Young, he was a third round pick a few years ago. A lot of people said that was a reach, but he's shown a little bit again. He's a young buck. He's going to develop, and so I like how our defensive line room is shaping up. We got a lot of depth along with a lot of good high tier starters. So defensive line room is shaping up well.
Yeah, and another guy we had on the bubble, Charles Snowden, 6'6", right on the bubble. Played in that third preseason game, which means he's not a lock to make the roster. However, did show flashes. We saw 92 running all over the field, and he's definitely a guy who can, creep up and maybe take one of these spots, especially like you said, Janarius Robinson was dealing with off the field issues right after he signed the contract. So you never know in that position. But moving on to the linebackers, this is a pretty solid room. And I think this is, part of the Raiders defense where you got a lot to look forward to over here. You got Robert Spillane and Divine Diablo locked as the two middle linebackers, who will be, switching off I think that green dot duty. It was Divine Diablo last year, but you never know. I believe I heard Robert Spillane is getting some reps with that green dot this year as well. Moving on, Luke Masterson is another guy who we've heard flashes about in preseason, who's going to make the team and be that third linebacker, that sub linebacker role, who sub out for the starting two guys. Then you got Tommy Eichenberg, who was also a draft pick, someone who was I believe he was a 5th round draft pick this year, and just really played well at Ohio State. I mean, there was not much tape on him, but he was a late round draft pick. But he's another guy who can really make an impact on defense and probably, eventually take over for Robert Spillane, in the next however many years Robert Spillane has left. But then Amari Gaynor and Amari Burney, two of the guys right here. We got both of them on the edge of making the roster. I think we're going to lean towards giving it to Amari Gaynor just because of how he played in preseason. He had 13 tackles in that last preseason game against the 49ers last week. So I think overall you got to give the edge to him. Amari Burney was another draft pick last year who showed flashes during the preseason as well. Didn't get much playing time last year, but I think we're going to have to give it to Amari Gaynor right here after that 12 tackle performance really showed that he can make stops, especially on the run.
So moving on to the DB room, which is, I think, really interesting because I think at some point we're going to bring in a veteran corner like an Adoree Jackson. But as of now, we have Jack Jones obviously starting at one spot, Jack Bennett on the other side with Nate Hobbs in the slot. So those are our three base starting cornerbacks. And then for depth, DeCamerion Richardson, who was a 4th round pick last year, has flashed in camp. He's an athletic freak. He's 6'4", I think he's like 6'2", and he has, lightning speed at that corner spot. So he's a really athletic, and he has all the talent at the cornerback position. Just a matter of him developing his technique, which I think he will over time, to eventually take over starting role. And then more depth, MJ Devonshire, who I believe was a 7th round pick. He hasn't showed a ton in camp. I think as of now, the depth in the corner room is really thin there. So we have him making it. We'll see how he performs. And then Sam Webb, who he's a guy we've had on the roster for a lot of years now. And, he had his struggles. He's the one who gave up that Rams touchdown to lose that game in SoFi. But this preseason has been a little bit better. He was the one who deflected that ball off Deebo Samuel for the interception on Brock Purdy just last preseason game. But in turn, he was playing in that preseason game, which solidifies that he doesn't necessarily have that spot locked up yet. And so we don't have Brandon Faison making it. He's been injured. He hasn't played at all in the preseason, which is never a good sign if you're fighting for a spot. And then Wu Governor, a guy who he's looked decent in preseason, but I just don't think he's going to beat out a crowded cornerback room. There's a lot of guys in front of him, but it's yet to be seen if we bring in another corner to replace a guy like Devonshire or Webb. But as of now, those are the 6 we got going into the 53-man roster.
To wrap it up here at the safety position, we got Trayvon Merrick obviously starting at the free safety spot, which he's got that locked up. He's played really well over the last few years. He really took some leaps last year during the season and, now changed his number to number 7. So that's going to be interesting seeing him running around. Mixed with number 1, Marcus Epps, who is our strong safety and is going to be there for, the near future. I think he's coming into a contract year, but, if Antonio Pierce knows what's good for him, they'll give him an extension as he also played really well last year. Another guy who you see sometimes as a sub linebacker playing in the box as well as outside is Isaiah Pola-Mao out of USC. He's another guy, just like his uncle, Troy Polamalu, hard hitter, can come up from over the top and make a hit on the receiver or the tight end. Guards tight ends really well. He's big and long at 6'4". So definitely a guy we'd like to have in that safety room. So the last 2 guys on the roster in the safety room, we got Chris Smith and Trey Taylor. Both promising guys, both young. Trey Taylor was a rookie out of Air Force this year who we drafted with the 6th round pick. And then Chris Smith was a guy who we drafted last year as a 6th or 7th round pick, I believe. So yeah, our safety room is going to look good, and that secondary should have a decent year. we do believe that we should bring a veteran corner in still.
Yeah, I think this roster outside of the quarterback position it's a pretty solid roster. I would say it's a top 10 roster, top to bottom. I think there's a good mix of superstar talent as well as depth. So I think Telesco did a good job. With the rest of the roster, quarterback's a different story. Hopefully, Minshew can play well for us. But Raider Nation, we really appreciate the support on our channel recently. Continue liking the videos, leaving comments down below, sharing with your friends, and most importantly, subscribe to the page. It's completely free and it helps us grow. And we're trying to reach that 1,000 mark for monetization. So, Raider Nation, thank you guys. And until next time, we'll see you.